Good night, world. Good night, or morning, or day, or evening. Greetings and welcome back once again. This is Amuna Yisrael, Solonomics 101, LEV Project. I know people like Solonomics 101. You know, where's the rest of it? You know, everybody has to play their part. So, welcome. We are on the 98th.
Solonomics 101, you know.
We are on the 98th episode, if you could believe it, of the LEV Project. You know, when you endeavor to do such things as this, you know, oftentimes we want to help our community, but the first and foremost, it helps you as an individual to grow. And so, as you can imagine, in 98 episodes, when I first started back on January 1, I've grown so much. And the feedback from others who have grown in their thought and understanding has been immense and tremendous and has made it all worth it. And we're not done yet because we're only coming up to October. So we're actually going to have November and December, 2 more months to do before we finish up this year-long conversation. And hopefully, others will continue to pick it up and go forward. But before I actually get into reading, we had, since doing this, I get tips and feedback and people looking out to send stuff my way. And so I got a message from J. John 4040. And hold on, let me go there. And he says, Imuna, in all caps, exclamation, Black people, all caps, a brother is building a museum on slavery that white supremacists want to forget about. He is not, all capital, a coon or house Negro. Let's support this brother. Here is some of his work. And then he gave me the documentary, or someone visited the museum. It's actually a museum. I watched the whole thing. It's a museum. It's a smaller museum, but you can tell that he's very involved. And again, is an elder. He went to the continent. He said he sat with and interviewed and has collected a lot of things. And so he's an educator. And of course, in this area, as you will take the time to prayerfully click the link and share the link, you'll begin to see why it's important. What I found also very interesting in what he's doing is he's making a fundraiser, but it's collective in the fact that if you buy a brick and if you purchase a brick, and I just saw it tonight, and your name will be inscribed on that brick, and that brick will come together to build a tunnel of remembrance that he wants to build. So definitely, please check out the link. I put it in the box. And it is something that could, again, if we continue to help bring awareness to it, it can go further. So with that said, like I said before, I put it in the box. While I was watching that, and it's on the Slave Museum, PA, I know there's another slave museum or a quote African American History Museum that everybody's talking about. I didn't have an opportunity to, in DC, I didn't have an opportunity to look at some of the footage from that as yet. But when I was watching this museum, sometimes the smaller things that we do, because we don't have marketing dollars and ad budget and all of this stuff and all this notoriety, the real nitty gritty stuff goes unnoticed. And it's unfortunate that as a people, we tend to flock to things that are just about hype, and the deep cleaning, not so many. But I give thanks for those who are interested in the deep cleaning and getting a deeper understanding and going beyond the surface. With that said, we are reading A Girl's Life in Virginia Before the War. We're really trying to finish up this book before our 100th episode. Before I go there, as I was watching the documentary, and this is very short, I put it here as well. The elder was reading the 10 Precepts of American Slavery Jurisprudence, written by A. Leon Higginbotham Jr. And then, of course, me being me, I wanted to look up who he was. And it says he was a prominent African-American civil rights advocate, author, and federal appeals court judge. And so he wrote the 10 precepts. And as the elder was reading, I said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and share this because I found it interesting. So I also put a link to that, and it's by A. Leon Higginbotham Jr. It says the 10 precepts of American slavery jurisprudence. And once again, the elder said it's very important for us to know this history. It is absolutely imperative for us to know this history. And there's those of us that are committed to that. And then there's the responsibility of the greater of us to actually take up our own portion and move forward with it. So I'm gonna read. It says, slaveholders, legislators, judges, and other public officials displayed a common understanding of the issues of race and slavery that catered to their shared economic interests and political views. This common understanding created a simple universality of the rules. Once established, these rules formed the logical and presidential, sorry, it's not a president, it says, maybe, yeah, presidential, that's what it looks like, foundation for American slavery culture for more than 200 years. It is the breakdown of those components making up this, quote, universality of the rules, end quote, that I call the 10 precepts of American slavery jurisprudence. And you can definitely read it on. It says, even after the abolition of slavery, some aspects of those precepts pertaining to the alleged inferiority of blacks and the desire to make blacks powerless still continue to haunt America in 1996. Again, he was, again, as we read, I'll read a little bit about who was writing. He's a civil rights advocate, an author, a federal appeals court judge. So in order to be a judge, he had to have been a lawyer. And so you can understand where he's coming from. And he has it all in the subtitles, and I'm going to go from there. It says, inferiority. Presume, preserve, protect, and defend the ideal of the superiority of whites and the inferiority of blacks. Property. Define the slave as the master's property, maximize the master's economic interest, disregard the humanity of the slave except when it serves the master's interest, and deny slaves the fruit of their labors. The third precept he has, powerlessness. Keep blacks, whether slave or free, as powerless as possible so that they will be submissive and dependent in every every respect, not only to the master, but to whites in general. Limit blacks' accessibility to the courts and subject blacks to an inferior system of justice with lesser rights and protections and greater punishment than for whites. This is something that we see. He's not just hypothesizing. This is reality. Utilize violence and the powers of government to assure the submissiveness of blacks. Racial purity. Always preserve white male sexual dominance. Draw an arbitrary racial line and preserve white racial purity as thus defined. Tolerate sexual relations between white men and black women. Punish severely sexual relations between white women and non-white men. With respect to children who are products of interracial relationships, the freedom or enslavement of the black child is determined by the status of the mother. And that, we know that comes from slavery. Manumission and free blacks. Limit and discourage manumissions in order to minimize the number of free blacks in the state. Confine free blacks to a status as close as possible to slavery. Family. Recognize no rights of the black family. Destroy the unity of the black family. Deny slaves the right of marriage. Demean and degrade black women, black men, black parents, and black children, and then condemn them for their conduct and state of mind. Education and culture. Deny blacks any education, deny them knowledge of their culture, and make it a crime to teach those who are slaves how to read or write. And this, again, it's having footnotes here. And religion. Recognize no rights of slaves to define and practice their own religion, to choose their own religious leaders or to worship with other blacks. Encourage them to adopt the religion of the white master and teach them that God is white and will reward the slave who obeys the commands of his masters here on earth. Use religion to justify the slave status on earth. Liberty, resistance. Limit blacks' opportunity to resist, bear arms, rebel, or flee. Curtail their freedom of movement, freedom of association, and freedom of expression. Deny blacks the right to vote and to participate in government. And again, he's noting historical things. And by any means possible, the last precept he has, support all measures, including the use of violence, which maximize the profitability of slavery and which legitimize racism. We're seeing this today. Excessive force. deadly force when the situation doesn't call for it. Opposed by the use of violence if necessary, all measures which advocate the abolition of slavery or the diminution of white supremacy. And he also, because he is a lawyer and a judge, they have footnotes here. So again, if you want to look further into this, and hopefully you do, just go ahead and click on the link in the box. They have some case law here. The 10 Precepts of American Slavery Jurisprudence, Chief Justice Roger Taney's Defense and Justice. This is 96. They have notes here. See Leroy Fiber Co. versus Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul. So this is case law, and I like looking at case law. 1914, 1989, 1992, 1989, 1993, and it's case law. So case law, that gives you an opportunity to look at what they use to justify when you see sometimes people get off, and not sometimes, a lot of times, and people shoot people with deadly force and they get off, and you're wondering, you marching in the streets. This is already a precedent. This is the framework that when they go into the court systems, this is the stuff that they're actually ruling by when we think it's supposed to be justice. There never has been. And what we're experiencing now is just the magnification of what has always been, and oftentimes what has been swept under the rug, but now it's just out in the open. So I wanted to share that, and definitely go ahead and click the link in the box. And so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into trying to finish up here, A Girl's Life in Virginia. So let me close some of this stuff here. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to share. I know it's not always the juicy part. I do other videos. I know some people might be like, wow, I do other videos. I'm on Facebook as well, where I do other comments, commentary today, space and time, issues that we deal with. But for right now, as it relates to the long extended videos, this is what it is. This is what it is. So here we go. And again, if you would like to read, I've been saying this, I've been saying this for like 10, it's going to be 10 months. 10 months. I've been saying the same thing. And we get almost little, like about 2% response. And a 1% actually show up to actually participate in our own mental liberation. So it's not always hype. We can't always go looking for the hype. It doesn't work like that. We have to be willing to drudge through the parts that are not so excitable, because we've gotten accustomed to excitement. And again, when you're in spaces where there's always something going on, high adrenaline, low vibrational fear mongering and tactics, and it's always something that's fight or flight, then when it comes to things like this, we become disinterested. But it's these very things that's going to help us to really understand our position and how we go about fixing where we are and why we are where we are. So, there's a famous, for lack of knowledge, people perish. So if we choose to, and the elder actually says that on the documentary or on the visit, if we choose to ignore that which is before us, then we have no excuse. So chapter 14. This is A Girl's Life in Virginia Before the War, Letita M. Burrell. This is a European. If you don't know, this is a European. She retroactively is writing her narrative of her childhood and how she viewed slavery. She cleaned it up and tried to make it look like a benign institution. And so, again, we're looking at her perspective, because when you go out there, like right now, around where I'm at, Trump is here. It's raining too. The sky just opened up, and he has a big rally. And I just looked on it before I came here, and I'm like, wow, look at all those people. So these are the people you go outside with. These are the people who you may see at the store. They may be cashing out your stuff, and people are having these mentalities, these false narratives, this misinformation in their mind, and this is what they're using to interface with their reality and their world around them. And she is one of them that was a little bit, confused. But anyway, yeah, that's wild. Everybody's, I don't know, that's another subject. But chapter 14, from the sorrows of Miss Burney in the palace, a striking contrast with the menials described in our own country homes. Let me pause, because people are like, oh, why you be going slow? Sometimes people didn't hear the one before. So basically, she is telling the story about a servant in England who had to serve the queen, and she was so sorry because the woman had to work from sun up to 12 o'clock and midnight, and how she was treated so badly. But when it relates to the slave, she didn't have that same thought. So for the European woman, she had sympathy. And so this is where she's at now, still speaking about that situation. From the sorrows of Miss Burney in the palace, a striking contrast with the menials described in our own country homes. I will turn to another charming place on the James River, Polton Seat, and a mile below Richmond, which had descended in the Mayo family 200 years. Here it was said the Indian chief Powhatan had lived, and here was shown the venerable stone supposed to have been the one upon which Captain Smith's head was laid when the Indian princess Pocahontas rescued him. This historic stone near the parlor window was only an ugly, dark, broad, flat stone, but imagination picture ever around it the Indian group. Smith's head upon it, the infuriated chief, which with uplifted club in the act of dealing the death blow, the grief and shriek of Pocahontas as she threw herself upon Smith, imploring her father to spare him, a piercing cry to have penetrated the hearts of the savage chief. Looking out from the parlor and window and imagining this savage scene, how strange a contrast met the eye within. Around the fireside assembled the loveliest family group, where kindness and affection beamed in every eye, and father, mother, brothers, and sisters were linked together by tenderest devotion and sympathy. If natural scenery reflects itself upon the heart, no wonder a holy calm rested upon this family. For far down the river, the prospect was peace and tranquility, and many an evening in the summer house of the river bank we drank in the beauty of soft blue skies, green isles and white sails floating in the distance. Understand, she's 9 generations, if I'm not mistaken, 9 generations of slaveholders. So you could almost guess, why anytime she's talking about the slaveholding class, she's a little light on it. Many in Richmond remember the delightful weddings and parties at Potawatomi Seat, where assembled the elite from Richmond, with an innumerable throng of cousins, aunts, uncles from Orange and Culpeper counties. On these occasions, the house was illuminated by wax lights issuing from bouquets of magnolia leaves placed around the walls near the ceilings and looking prettier than any glass chandelier. We from a distance generally stayed a week after the wedding, becoming as it were a part of the family circle, and the bride did not rush off on a tour as it is the fashion nowadays, but remained quietly at home enjoying the society of her family and friends. One feature I have omitted in describing our weddings, one feature, you omitted more than that, and parties, invariably a party of the picture was the sea of black faces surrounding the doors and windows to look on the dancing, hear the music, and afterwards get a good share of the supper. Oh, wow. Tourists often went to walk around the beautiful grounds at Powhatan, so neatly kept with seashells around the flowers and pleasant seats under the lindels and magnolias, and to see the historic stone. But I often thought they knew not what was missed in not knowing, as we did, the lovely family within. But for us, those rare, beautiful days at Powhatan are gone forever, for since the war, the property has passed into strange hands, and the family who once owned it will own it no more. During the late war, heavy guns were placed in the family burying ground on this plantation, a point commanding the river, and here was interred the child of distinguished general in the Northern Army, a Virginian formerly in the United States Army, who had married a member of the Powhatan family. He was expected to make an attack upon Richmond, and over his child's grave was placed a gun to fire upon him. Such are the unnatural incidents of the civil war. About 2 miles from I don't know, I keep saying it different every time I say it. Powhatan Seat was another beautiful old place, Mount Erin, the plantation formerly of a family, all of whom, except 2 sisters, had died. The estate becoming involved had to be sold, which so grieved and distressed these sisters that they passed hours weeping and accidentally the name of their old home was mentioned in their presence. Once when we were at Powhatan, and these ladies were among the guests, a member of the Powhatan family ordered the carriage and took my sister and myself to Mount Erin, telling us to keep it a secret when we returned, for the sisters, quote unquote, said she would neither eat nor sleep if reminded of their own home, old home. A pleasant drive brought us to Mount Erin, and when we saw the box hedges, gravel walks, and linden trees, we were no longer surprised at the grief of the sisters whose heart entwined around their old home. The house was in the charge of an old Negro woman, the purchaser not having moved in, who showed us over the grounds, and every shrub and flower seemed to speak of days gone by. Even the ivy of the old bricks looked gloomy, as if mourning the light, mirth, and song departed from the house forever. And the walks gave back a deadened echo, as if they wished not to be disturbed by stranger tread. All seemed in a reverie, dreaming a long, sweet dream of the past, and entering into the grief of sisters who lived afterward for many years in a pleasant home on a pleasant street in Richmond, with warm friends to serve them, yet their tears never ceased to flow at the mention of Mount Erin. Oh, poor things. For those who just joined us, peace, peace, family, peace, son of Levi, peace, sister Angel. This is Angel said who could fill in the gaps. She's like, everyone got the memo. Yep. You know, you already know how it is. I would like readers though too, because sometimes, it's different when you're reading, but I do what I gotta do. I started it, so it builds stamina, you know what I mean, just to be able to make it through and to go deeper into our understanding collectively. So it's a beautiful thing. Thank you for tuning in. We're on page, what's this, 147, chapter 14, before the war. One more plantation picture and enough will have been described to show the character of the homes and people on our plantation. The last place visited by my sister and myself before the war of 1861. How many people know how long the Civil War lasted for? She just told us it started in 1861. I know we've been reading enough narratives. When did the Civil War end? That's the question. When did the Civil War end? Was Elkwood, a fine estate in Culpeper County, 4 miles from the railroad station, the residence of Richard Cunningham. It was the last of June. The country was a scene of enchantment as the carriage rolled us through dark, cool forests, green meadows, fields of waving grain, out of the forest into acres of broad levied corn, across pebble-bottomed streams, and along the margins of Rapidan, which flowed at the base of the hill leading up to the house. The house was square and white, and the blinds green as the grass lawn and trees in the yard. Inside the house, the polished, dry-rubbed floors, clean and cool, refreshing one on entering like glass of iced lemonade on a midsummer day. The old-fashioned furniture against the walls looked as if it thought too much of itself to be set about promiscuously over the floor like modern fauteuils and divans, if that's how you say that word there. She goes on to say, again, about everything was an air of dignity and response corresponding with the manners and appearance of the proprietors, who were called Uncle Dick and Aunt Jenny, the A in aunt pronounced very broad. Aunt Jenny and Uncle Dick had no children, but took care of numerous nieces and nephews, kept their house filled to overflowing with friends and friends, relatives, and strangers, and were revered and beloved by all. They had no pleasure so great as to taking care of other people. They lived for other people and made everyone comfortable and happy around them. From the time Uncle Dick had prayers in the morning until family prayers at bedtime, they were busy bestowing some kindness. Uncle Dick's character and manners were of a type so high that one felt elevated in his presence, and a desire to reach his standard animated those who knew him. His precept and example were such that all who followed them might arrive at the highest perfection of Christian character. Uncle Dick had requested Aunt Jenny, when they were married 40 years before, to have his table every day to have on his table every day dinner enough for 6 more persons than were already in the house, in case, he said, he should meet friends or acquaintances by riding over to his plantation or in the neighborhood whom he wished to at home with him to dinner. This having been always a rule, Aunt Jenny never sat at her table without dinner enough for 6 more, and hers were no commonplace dinners, no hasty puddings, no, what is this? Salubrious bread, no soda cakes, no frozen starch ice cream, no modern shorthand recipes, but genuine old Virginia cooking. And all who want to know what that was can find all about it in Aunt Jenny's book of copied recipes, if it is exact extent, or in that of Mrs. Harrison's of Brandon. But as neither of these books may ever be known to the public, their sum and substance may be given in a few words. Have no shams. Procure an abundance of the freshest, richest, real cream, milk, egg, butter, lard. That sound like cardiovascular issues. That sound like some heart attack type stuff. Best old Madeira wine, all the way from Madeira, and never use a particle of soda or saleratus about anything or under any pressure. These were the ingredients Aunt Jenny used, for Uncle Dick had rare old wine in his cellar, which he had brought from Europe 30 years before. And every day was a feast day at Elkwood. And the wedding breakfast Aunt Jenny used to get up when one of her nieces married at her house, as they sometimes did, were beyond description. They just like scheming on other people's house so they could pop up there and eat. Son of Levi say 65. Correct, son of Levi, 65. That's when it is said to have ended. And we have read some accounts where some of the Europeans did not tell those who were enslaved that they were free. And they looked to get as much work out of them. And some people went way beyond that time. And one account I read, I think she went like 14 years beyond the time, or some crazy amount of time, because the woman never told her she was free. So just keep that in mind as it relates to a lot of the stuff that we're seeing into this day and time, that you're dealing with a people where something may be on the books, but if we don't know, then they're not going to make you any the wiser. So, for clarity, the memo comment was about the pre-reading, a plan thoroughly carried out. Okay, yeah, the pre-reading, definitely, for those who missed the pre-reading, it's in the link, the 10 Precepts of American Slavery Jurisprudence, and the documentary that I wanted to share. My brother shared it with me, and I wanted to share with everybody. There's a slave museum. If you're in the northeast area, it's in Pennsylvania. It's by an elder, and he just I would love to talk to him, because he looks like a wealth of information, and he's very passionate, from what I can tell, about what it is he does and the education of our people. So if you're in the Pennsylvania, New York area, New Jersey area, definitely go check it out. I put the link in the box, and once you watch it, you'll be able to get the location of that museum. Please support, as well as I saw that he's trying to build a wall of a tunnel of remembrance, and one brick, I think he said, you contribute a brick in it, and one of the bricks is $75. It has your name, inscription, and you go amongst others collectively. And so these are the type of stuff that we need to support, because it helps to bring a broader consciousness to the general public. So definitely check that out after you finish listening to this. It says here, while at Elkwood, observing every day that the carriage went to the depot empty and returned empty, we inquired the reason, and were informed that Uncle Dick, ever since the cars had been passing near his plantation, ordered his coachman to have the carriage every day at the station, in case some of his friends might be on the train and might like to stop and see him. Another hospitable rule in Uncle Dick's house was that company must never be kept waiting in his parlor. And so anxious was his young niece to meet his approbation in this, as in every particular, that she had a habit of dressing herself carefully and arranging her hair beautifully. It was in the days, too, when smooth hair was fashionable, before laying down for the afternoon siesta. They just sound like they was working a lot, huh? Just siestas, waking up early, combing your hair, eating a lot of food. That sound like I said, that sound like some ailments right there. In case, she said, someone might call, and Uncle Dick had a horror of visitors waiting. This process of reposing in a fresh mousseline dress and fashionably arranged hair required a particular and uncomfortable position, which she seemed not to mind, but dozed in the most precious manner without rumpling her hair or her dress. Elkwood was a favorite place of resort for Episcopal ministers, whom Aunt Jenny and Uncle Dick loved to entertain. And here we met the Reverend Philip Slaughter, the learned, divine, eloquent preacher and charming companion. He had just returned from his visit to England, where he had been entertaining in palaces, telling us the incidents of his visit. I was much embarrassed at first, said he, at the thought of attending a dinner party given in a palace to me, a simple Virginian, but on being announced at the drawing room door and entering the company, I felt at once at ease, for they were all ladies and gentlemen such as I had known at home, polite, pleasant, and without pretense. This gentleman's conversational powers were not only bright and delightful, but also the means of turning many to righteousness, for religion was one of his chief themes. A proof of his genius and eloquence was given in the beautiful poem recited without ever having been written at the centennial anniversary of the old Christ Church in Alexandria. This was the church in which General Washington and his family had worshiped, like, okay, and that, anyway. And around it clustered many memories, I bet. Mr. Slaughter, with several others, had invited to make an address on the occasion, and one night, while thinking about it, an exquisite poem passed through his mind. Picturing, picturing scene after scene in the old church, General Washington with his head bowed in silent prayer, infants at the baptismal font, young men and maidens in bridal array at the altar, and funeral trains passing through the open gate. On the night of the celebration, when his turn came, finding the hour too late and the audience too sleepy for his prose address, he suddenly determined to dash off the poem, every word of which came back to him, although he had never written it. The audience roused up, electrified, and as the recitation proceeded, the enthusiasm reached the highest pitch. Never had there been such a sensation in the old church before. And next morning, the house at which he was stopping was besieged by reporters begging, quote, copies and ordering good prices, but the poem remains unwritten to this day. Elkwood, like many other old homes, was burned by the Northern Army in 1862, and not a tree or flower remains to mark the spot that for so many years was the abode of hospitality and good cheer. In connection with Culpeper County, it is due here to the state that it excelled all others in ancient and dilapidated buggies and carriages, seemed to be a regular infirmary for all the disabled vehicles of the Old Dominion. Here, their age and infirmities receive every care and consideration, being propped up, tied up, and bandaged up in every conceivable manner, and strangest of all, rarely depositing their occupants in the road, which was prevented by cautious old gentlemen riding alongside, who, watching for and discovering the weakest point, stopped and securely tied up fractured parts with bits of twine, rope, and chain, always carried in buggies or carriage boxes for that purpose. Wait. These surgical operations, although not ornamental, strengthen and sustain their venerable vehicles and produce a miraculous longevity. Many more sketches might be given of pleasant country homes. Sketch, all right. Themes worthy a better pen than mine for Brandon, Westover, Shirley, Carter Hall, Lauderdale, what is this, Valcluse, and others linger in the memory of hundreds who once knew and loved them, especially Valcluse, which, although far removed from railroads, stagecoaches, and public conveyances, were overflowing with company throughout the year. For the Valcluse girls were so bright, so fascinating, and so bewitchingly pretty that they attracted a concourse of visitors and were sure to be belles wherever they went. And many remember the owner of Valcluse, Mr. Blair Dabney, that pure-hearted Christian, yo, and cultivated gentleman who late in life devoted himself to the Episcopal ministry and labored faithfully in the Master's cause, preaching in country house churches without money and without price. Surely his reward is in heaven. Beside these well-ordered establishments, there were some others owned by inactive men who smoked their pipes, read their books, left everything very much to the management of their Negroes, and seemed content to let things tumble down around them. One of these places we used to call Topsy-Turvy Castle, and another Haphazard. At such places, the Negro quarters, instead of being neat rows of white cabins in the rear of house, as on other plantations, occupied a conspicuous place near the front and consisted of solid, long, ugly brick structures with swarms of Negroes around the window and doors, appearing to have nothing in the world to do and never have done anything. Do you hear the tone change? The tone has changed. So you is good as long as you is in your place in the back in your little cabin. But if the master gave you anything more that will make others look less, then you're haphazard and topsy-turvy. And so understand that there was pressure from other slave masters. There was a whole competition around. These were all little small businesses, these plantations was. And everybody was your neighbor, but they were also, competition. There was, as she's saying, this one is noted for this one is noted for that. And so they talked a lot. They ran their mouth a lot today, kind of like the same tabloids. I'll read that again because it's worth reading twice. At such places, the Negro quarters, instead of being neat rows of white cabins in the rear of the house, as on the other plantations, occupied a conspicuous place near the front and consisted of solid, long, ugly brick structure, with swarms of Negroes around the windows and doors, appearing to have nothing in the world to do and never to have done anything. Everything had a shackling, lazy appearance. The master was always, it appeared to us, reading a newspaper in the front porch, never observing anything that was going on. The house was so full of idle Negroes standing around about the halls and stairways that one could scarcely make one's way up or down the stairs. Everything needed repair, from the bed upon which you slept to the family coach which took you to church. Few of the chairs had all their rounds and legs, and when completely disabled were sent to the garret, where they accumulated in great numbers and remained until pressing necessity, including the master, to raise his eyes from the paper long enough to order, quote, Dick to take the 4-horse wagon and carry the chairs to be mended. A multitude of kinsfolk and acquaintances usually congregate here, and at one place, in order to accommodate so many, there were 4 beds in a chamber. These high bedsteads presented, so they were using each other as hotels, basically. These high bedsteads presented a remarkable appearance, the head of one going into the side of another, the foot of one into the head of another, and so on, looking as if they had never been placed, but as if their curious juxtaposition had been the result of an earthquake. One of these houses is said to have been greatly improved in appearance during the war by the passage of cannonball through the upper story. Wow, it greatly improved because they destroyed it, where a window had been needed for many years. But the owners of these places were so genuinely good, one could not complain of them, even for such carelessness, for everybody was welcome to everything. You might stop the plows if you wanted a horse, or take the carriage and drive for upon a week's journey, and in short impose upon these good people in every conceivable way. So as long as I can exploit you and use all your stuff for free, then hey, Son of Levy said Obama has done nothing to help the Black community. He's helped everyone except for us. So now when Black people, what have you done for us? He's going to say, I built the Black Museum. So now when Black people, what have you done? Oh, you're talking about the one in you're talking about the one, I didn't even get to look into that. You're talking about the one in DC. Okay, yeah, this one I'm talking about, it's a melanated man who, I guess, and his family who put their time. You could tell it's like their little baby. So definitely if you're in that area, support. If you're gonna come through that area, support. I'll look into that museum, that other one, and later on. It's again, we like commercialized. We even like commercialized versions of our own history. Like the stuff that we've been doing, it really, you're really just paying with your time, because a lot of this stuff is free. Like somebody actually uploaded all of these narratives to preserve them. They're free. I like books. I happen to like books because I can't deal with always looking on the computer screen, the way I read. But again, for those who want to just read along, it's free. But we like commercialized versions of our history. We still want someone else to process it for us, to a certain degree. And so we have to come out of that mentality of always thinking somebody owes us something in that respect, especially when you want to get the truth and nothing but the truth. You got to go on that journey for yourself. But definitely, I guess we'll take a look at that and then come back and discuss that DC museum. But it goes on to say, yet in spite of this topsy-turvy management, a strange fact connected with such places, they invariably had good light bread. Here it goes. What's in it for me? They had good mutton, sorry, and the usual abundance of their tables. Like they had good food. I wonder if they was like throwing like a collection plate. Like you stay at somebody's crib for a month. Did you just stay there and eat up all this stuff? Like, did you pay them? Did you give alms? Or I never hear them say, and we gave them a little bit of money or something. But anyway, yet in spite of this topsy-turvy management, a strange fact connected with such places, they invariably had good light. Oh, I already said that. We suppose it must have been a recollection of such plantations, which induced the Negro to exclaim on hearing another sing, "Oh, Virginie never tire. Oh, Virginie never tire, 'cause she never done nothing to fatigue herself." That's the way she wrote it. I guess that's the end of that chapter, huh? Chapter 15. Let's bust out chapter 15. We moving. Chapter 15. If anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to do or share. For those who just joined us, we're reading A Girl's Life in Virginia Before the War, chapter 15. Confining these reminiscences strictly to plantation life, no mention has been made of the families we knew and visited in some of our cities, whose kindness to their slaves was unmistakable, and who, owning only a small number, could better afford to indulge them. At one of these houses, this indulgence was such that the white family were very much under the control of their servants. I don't know where she was living. The owner of his house, Charles Mosby, an eminent lawyer, was a man of taste and learning, whose legal ability attracted many admirers, and whose refinement, culture, and generous nature won enthusiastic friends. Although considered the owner of his house, it was a mistake if ownership means the right to govern one's own property. For beyond his law papers, library, and the privilege of paying all the bills, this gentleman had no, quote, rights there. Whatever his house, kitchen, and premises being under the entire command of Aunt Fanny, the cook, a huge mulatto woman whose word was law and whose voice thundered abuse in any dared to, oh, I can't with her. Here we go. Whose voice thundered abuse if any dared to disobey her. So all of the slave masters are nice, and now the slaves are the one who are just lazy, shiftless, not doing nothing. All of these type of stuff like this. It goes on to say, the master, mistress, family, and visitors all stood in awe of Aunt Fanny, and yet could not do without her, for she made unapproachable light bread and conducted the affairs of the palace with distinguished ability. Her own house was in the yard and had been quite especially for her convenience. Her furniture was polished mahogany, and she kept most delicious preserves, pickled, and sweetmeats of her own manufacture, with which to regale her friends and favorites. As we came under that head, we were often treated when we went in to see her after her day's work was over or on Sundays. Although she raved and stormed, quote unquote, considerably, which she told us she was obliged to do, honey, to keep things straight, she had the tenderest regard for her master and mistress, and often said, if it weren't for me, they'd have nothing in the world, and things here would go to the destruction. So Aunt Fanny kept this family, as she said, for many years, and many amusing incidents might be related of her. On one occasion, her master, after a long, excited political contest, was elected to legislature. Where am I? Before all the precincts had been heard from. Believing himself defeated, he retired to rest, and being naturally feeble, was quite worn out. But at midnight a cry arose at his gate, where a multitude assembled, screaming and hurrying. At first he was uncertain whether they were friends to congratulate him on his victory, or the opposite party to hang him, as they had threatened for voting an appropriation to Danville Railroad. It soon appeared they had come to congratulate him. When great excitement prevailed, loud cheers and cries for a speech, the doors were opened and the crowd rushed in. The hero soon appeared and delivered one of his graceful and satisfactory speeches. Still, the crowd remained cheering and storming about the house until Aunt Fanny, so she's supposed to be the angry black woman. Remember the stereotypes? She's the mammy. She looks like she's a cross between the mammy and the angry black woman. She's all put together. Who had made her appearance? They go supposed to be mammy, with her hands on her hips. She's the big black woman, scary, you know, protecting the master's interests. It goes on to say, full dress, considered the excitement had been kept up long enough and that the master's health was too delicate for further demonstration, determined to disperse them. Rising to her full height, waving her hand and speaking majestically, she said, "Gentlemen, Marsh Charles is a feeble person, and it's time for him to take his rest. He's been kept awake long enough now, and it's time for me to close up these doors." With this, the crowd dispersed, and Aunt Fanny remained mistress of the situation, declaring if she hadn't come forward and dispersed that crowd, Marsh Charles would have been a dead man before morning. Aunt Fanny kept herself liberally supplied with pocket money. Listen to how she just keep reading, Mona. One of her chief sources of revenue being soap, which she made in large quantities and sold at high prices. Oh gosh, keep reading, Mona. Especially it's late. Before, let me just breathe for a second. All right. Which was in great demand, and which made from all the butter which she did not consider fresh enough for the delicate appetites of her mistress and master. She appropriated one of the largest basement rooms, had its shelves, and filled it with soap. In order to carry out business so extensively huge, logs were kept blazing on the kitchen hearth under the soap pot day and night. During the war, wood became scarce and expensive. Marsh Charles found that it drained his purse to keep the kitchen fire supplied. Thinking the matter over one day in his library and concluding it would greatly lessen his expense if Aunt Fanny could be prevailed upon to discontinue her soap trade, he sent for her and said very mildly, "Fanny, I have a proposition to make you." "What is it, Marsh Charles?" "Well, Fanny, as my expenses are very heavy now, if you will give up your soap boiling for this year, I will agree to pay you $50. With arms akimbo and looking at him with astonishment, but with firmness in her eyes, she replied, "Couldn't possibly do it, Master Charles, because soap, sir, soap's my maintenance. Soap is my maintenance." I can't with this woman. Yo, son, did they have a reporter in the room? Like, yo, how did she get all of this information? Like, who conveyed all of this to you? But anyway, with this, she strode majestically out of the room. Marsh Charles said no more, but continued paying fabulous sums of wood. While Aunt Fanny continued boiling her soap. This woman not only ordered, but kept all the family supplies, her mistress having no disposition to keep the keys or in any way interfere with her. Oh, so they scared of the big black lady, Aunt Fanny. Right. But at last her giant strength gave way, and she sickened and died. Having no children, she left her property to one of her fellow servants. Several days before her death, we were sitting with her mistress and master in a room overlooking her house. Her room was crowded with Negroes who had come to perform their religious rites around deathbed. Joining hands, they performed a savage dance, shouting wildly around her bed. This was horrible to hear and see, especially as in this family every effort had been made to instruct their Negro dependents in the truths of religion. And one member of the family who spent the greater part of her life in prayer had for years prayed for Aunt Fanny and tried to instruct her in the truth and the true faith. But although an intelligent woman, she seemed to cling to the superstitions of her race. After the savage dance and rites were over, and while we sat talking, about it, a gentleman, the friend and minister of the family, came in. We described to him what had just witnessed, and he deplored it bitterly with us, saying he had read and prayed with Aunt Fanny and tried to make her see the truth of Jesus. He then marked some passages in the Bible and asked me to go and read them to her. I went and said to her, Aunt Fanny, here are some verses Mr. Mitchell has marked for me to read to you, and he hopes you'll pray to the Savior as he taught you. Then I said, we are afraid the noise and dancing has made you worse. Speaking feebly, she replied, honey, that kind of old religion suit us black folks better and your kind. What suit Marsh Charles might can't suit mine. And thus died the most intelligent of her race, one who had been surrounded by pious persons who had been praying for her and endeavoring to instruct her. She had also enjoyed throughout life not only the comforts, but many of the luxuries of earth. And when she died, her mistress and master lost and sincere friend. I can't. Yo, they need to put this narrative in Aunt Fanny's soap in the kitchen. You know, they need to put it in the fire so that drink can just continue to blaze up. Because this lady right here got some poo-poo, padoo-poo, as my niece would say. I mean, yo, she's going to extreme lengths. Like, you can't even take this woman seriously. You really can't. I'm going to continue because, again, like I said, this is the 98th episode. I'm definitely trying to knock this out before we get to 100 so we could start a buck. We could start a buck with the life of Olado Equiano and try to bounce back just a little bit because the Tita, my goodness. Anywho, chapter 16. For those who just joined us, yep, we're reading the girl's life in Virginia before the war. I notice people are like pressing thumbs down. Is it on other episodes? You know, it's funny because they usually don't say why they don't like it. Again, it's someone's experience. I could not like it, but I'm listening because I like to be able to gauge conversations. You know, it's not only just about how you feel and what you think. Because somebody must be like they say somebody's clueless. Like Latita appears to me to be very clueless. But nonetheless, we're gonna hear her out, and we almost, rounded it up. We on page chapter 16. This chapter will show how Virginia beet biscuits procured from a man home and friends in Paris. One morning in the spring of 1850 blank, a singular-looking man had presenting himself at our house. He was short of stature and enveloped in furs, although the weather was not cold. Everything about him which could be gold was gold, and so we called him the gold-tipped man. He called for my mother, and when she went into the parlor, he said, Madame, I have been stopping several weeks at the hotel in town of L, where I met a boy, Robert, who tells me he belongs to you. As I want such a servant, and he is anxious to travel, I come at his request to ask if you would let me buy him and take him to Europe. I will pay any price. I could not think of it, she replied. Right. I have determined never to sell one of my servants, but, continued the man, he is anxious to go, and he has set me to beg you. It is impossible, said she, for he is a great favorite with us, and the only child his mother has. Finding her determined, the man took his leave and went back to town 25 miles off, but returned next day accompanied by Robert, who entreated his mother and mistress to let him go. Said my mother to him, would you leave your mother and go with a stranger to a foreign land? Like, remember, she claimed that all the servants loved them, but yes, still Robert is like, sell him to a foreign land. Yes, madame, I love my mother and you and all the family. You always been so good to me, but I want to travel, and this gentleman say he gave me plenty of money and treat me good too. She she refused, but the boy's mother finally yielded to his entreaty, consented, and persuaded her mistress, saying, if he is willing to leave me and so anxious to go, I will give him up. Knowing how distressed we all would be at parting with him, he went off without coming to say goodbye, and wrote his mother from New York what day he would sail with his new master for Europe. At first, his mother received from him presents and letters, telling her he was very much delighted and had as much money as he knew what to do with. But after a few months, he ceased to write, and we could hear nothing from him. At length, when 18 months had elapsed, we were one day astonished to see him return home dressed in the best Parisian style. We were rejoiced to see him again, and his own joy at getting back cannot be described. He ran over the yard and house, exclaiming examining everything and said, "Mistress, I ain't seen no place pretty as yours." Oh, Father. Oh, goodness. I'm sorry, y'all. He ran over the yard and exclaimed everything and said, "Mistress, I ain't seen no place pretty as yours, and ain't no lady look to me like you in all the finest places I've been in Europe. And no water tastes good like the water in our old well. And I dream about you all about every old chair and table in this house and wonder if ever I'd see him again." He then gave us a sketch of his life since, and Gold Tip Man had become his master. Arrived in Paris, his master and himself took lodgings, and a teacher was employed to come every day and instruct Robert in French. His master kept him well supplied with money, never giving him less than $50 at a time. His duties were light, and he had ample time to study and amuse himself. After enjoying such elegant ease from 8 or 9 months, he awoke one morning and found himself deserted and penniless. His master had absconded in the night, leaving no vestige of himself except a gold dressing case and a few toilet articles of gold, which were seized by the proprietor of the hotel in payment of his bill. Poor Robert, without money and without a friend in his great city, knew not where to turn. In vain he wished himself back to his own home. "If I could only find some Virginian who I could appeal," said he to himself, and suddenly it occurred to him that the American minister, Mr. Mason, was Virginian. When he remembered this, his heart was cheered, and he lost no time in finding Mr. Mason's house. Okay, go on. What? Give me one second. It seems like a baby would like to have a little 1-second conversation. All right. We had to do some baby business. Go ahead and get it. All right. Now where are we? Poor Robert, without money and without a friend in this great city, knew not where to turn. In vain he wished himself back in Virginia. Okay, he went to Mr. Mason. Presenting himself before the American minister, he related his story, which was not at first believed, for, said Mr. Mason, "there are so many impostors in Paris, it is impossible to believe you." Robert protested he had been a slave in Virginia and had deserted by his owner in Paris, and begged Mr. Mason to keep him at his house and take care of him. Then Mr. M asked many questions about people and places in Virginia, all of which were accurately answered. Finally, he said, I knew well the Virginia gentleman who was, you say, your master. What was the color of his hair?" This was also satisfactory answer, and Robert began to hope he was believed when Mr. Mason continued, "Now there's one thing which, if you can do, will convince me you came from Virginia. Go in my kitchen and make me some old Virginia beet biscuit, and I'll believe everything you have said." "Seriously?" "I think I can, sir," said Robert, and going into the kitchen, rolled up his sleeve and set to work. This was a desperate moment, for he had never made a biscuit in his life, although he had watched the proceeding as, quote, "Black Mammy," end quote, the cook at home. Wow, they named her Black Mammy, son. The cook at home used to beat, roll, and manipulate the dough on her biscuit box. "If I only could make them look like hers," thought he, as he beat and rolled and worked and finally tucked the dough all over with a fork. Then cutting them out and putting them to bake, he watched them with nervous anxiety until they resembled those he had often placed on the table at home. Astonished and delighted with his success, he carried them to the American minister, who exclaimed, "Now I know you came from old Virginia." Robert was immediately installed in Mr. John Y. Mason's house, where he remained a faithful attendant until Mr. Mason's death, when he returned with the family to America. Arriving at New York, he thought it impossible to get along by himself and determined to find his master. How could it still be his master if he was sold? But anyway, for this purpose, he employed a policeman, and together they succeeded in recovering, quote, the lost master, end quote. This being a singular instance of a, quote, slave in pursuit of his fugitive master. The gold-tipped man expressed much pleasure at his servant's fidelity, and handing him a large sum of money, desired him to return to Paris, pay his bill, bring back his gold dressing box and toilet articles as a reward for his fidelity, take as much money as he wished, and travel over the continent. Robert obeyed these commands, returned to Paris, paid the bills, traveled over the chief places in Europe, and then came again to New York. Here he was appalled to learn that his master had been arrested for forgery and imprisoned in Philadelphia. It was ascertained that the forger was an Englishman connected with an underground forging establishment in Paris. Finding himself about to be detected in Paris, he fled to New York, and other forgeries having been discovered in Philadelphia, he had been arrested. Robert lost no time in reporting himself at the prison and was grieved to find his master in such a place. Determined to do what he could to relieve the man who had been a good friend to him, he went to Philadelphia lawyer and said to him, "Sir, the man who is in prison brought me in Virginia and has been a kind master to me. I have no money, but if you will do your best to have him acquitted, I will return to the South, sell myself, and send you the money." I can't, yo. "It is a bargain," replied the lawyer. "Send me the money and I will save your master from penitentiary." So according to her narrative, which again is about a half a grain of salt, she wants us to believe that the enslaved individual says he's going to sell himself back into slavery to spring the crooked master from jail, right? Robert returned to Baltimore and sold himself to a Jew in that city and sent the money to the lawyer in Philadelphia. After this, he was brought by a distinguished Southern senator, afterward a general in the Southern Army, with whom he remained and to whom he rendered valuable services during the war. So technically, this man would have been free, but instead, okay, wait. Other instances were known of Negroes who preferred being sold into slavery rather than take care of themselves. There were some in other immediate neighborhoods who, finding themselves emancipated by their master's will, begged the owners of neighboring plantations to buy them, saying they preferred having white people to take care of them. Is this true? Do we have any instances of this today, that people would rather be taken care by white people, quote unquote, than take care of themselves, and they actually beg owners of other plantations, aka corporate plantations or other entities, to take care of themselves so that they don't have the responsibility? There might be some truth to that. There might be some truth to this. Let's continue. On the Wheatley plantation, not far from us, there is still living an old Negro who sold himself in this way and cannot be persuaded now to accept his freedom. After the war, when all Negroes were freed by the federal government and our people were too much impoverished longer to clothe and feed them, this old man refused to leave the plantation but clung to his cabin, although his wife and family moved off and begged him to accompany them. "No," said he, "I never leave this plantation and go off to starve with free niggas." Not even when his wife was very sick and dying could he be persuaded to go off and stay one night with her. He had long been too old to work, but his former owners indulged him by giving him his cabin and taking care of him through all the poverty which was falling upon our land since the war. Stop that. Many of us remember this old man, Harrison Mitchell, who was an unusual character. High-toned and reliable. His father was an Indian and his mother a Negress. He resembled the Indian with straight black hair, brown skin, high cheekbones. His great pride was that he had come out the Patrick Henry estate and used to run a freight boat with flour down the James River from Lynchburg to Richmond, long before there was sign of town Lynch ferries. But his great and consuming theme, especially after the war, was the impossibility of the Negroes taking care of themselves. Bet out no white man, and nothing ever reconciled him to his own freedom. Taking his seat in our back porch, where my mother usually entered entertain him, we would assemble to hear him talk. I would ask, well, Uncle Harrison, what do you think of freedom now after 10 years? Lord, mistress, what I think of freedom? Well, mistress, these niggas is no more, what is this? Cackalack to take care of themselves than possums. And I tells you so, because what is a nigga without the white man? Wow. He ain't nothing and he ain't gonna be nothing. No ways they fix it. And they ain't going to stay free because the Lord never tends them to be nothing without white folks. Because everybody know nigga ain't got no head. I never want no nigga to be talking, what is this? Taking care of me. I looks to my white folks to take care of me. I'm gonna have to go in on this one at another time. Like this whole, let me mark this page, 188. I'm definitely gonna have to mark this page because this is some deep dialogue right here. He goes on to say, according to her, I looks to Mars Robert and ain't going left this plantation till I die. So according to her, after he was free, he didn't want to come off the plantation. This is truth. Not necessarily in his case, but it has been documented that some people decided to stay on with the master and get paid through sharecropping. What right Yankees gonna set me free and then can't take care of me? No niggas is niggas and going to be niggas. And white folks got to take care of them till end of creation or creation. And the Lord going to put every single one of them back in slavery just as sure as you born. True to his word, old Harrison refused to wear an article of clothing if the white folks didn't give it to him. And his daughter, wishing to give him a blanket, asked her former young mistress to let him think it was from her or he would not take it. And last, Mars Robert was on his deathbed. Old Harrison went in to see him for the last time. Mars Robert said, I got one request to make for you, guy. What is it? Asked his master. Mars Robert, I want to be buried right outside the grave or the garden lot where you and Miss Lucy is buried so I can see you first on the morning of the resurrection. I can't. Harrison, you shall be buried inside the lot with us, replied Mars Robert distinctly. And a lady who heard it told me she never saw such radiant happiness as the old man's face expressed when these words fell on his ears. We're going to stop there at chapter 17. We're going to pick up. We're definitely going to be able to finish up. We did 3 chapters, so we bust out 3 and 3. We're going to stop there at chapter 17, but I want to read what I read in the beginning because the conversation that she brought up just now is what we read in the 10 Precepts of American Slavery Jurisprudence. And basically, based on some of the stuff that I've seen, powerlessness. Keep blacks, whether slave or free, as powerless as possible, so that they will be submissive and dependent in every respect. This is what this woman is narrating. Not only to the master, but to whites in general. Limit blacks' accessibility to the courts and subject blacks to an inferior system of justice with lesser rights and protections and greater punishments than for whites. Utilize violence and the powers of the government to assure the submissiveness of blacks. So what we are, this is why I said that part of what she's saying, she may be, she may be embellishing, but the reality is that conversation, when he's thinking about, because some people be like, yeah, we're going to make it off, but just like we read in the 10 precepts no, you're going to make this thing spill, is that the whole system is one that will make you not be able or confident in one another, because the whole system is booby trapped. And for those, and there's something called in psychology, you can look it up, learned helplessness, where after time and time again of trying something and you keep getting the same result, you decide not to even try. So when she's trying to use the fact that if he did say what she's saying he said, others have said it, she's trying to use that to show how nice and how much they love the master. But on the contrary, it's shown that the system itself has made and has broken the people's spirit so much. They are strangers in a foreign land. And in their estimation, how can we succeed when the whole thing is rigged? And so, when you flip it on the other side, you do see this conversation of people who feel that they can't get further along. Why? Because no matter what you do, you put forth all your energy, effort, the whole thing is rigged. And so again, if you missed that, go back and read the 10 precepts. I put the link in the box. Meditate on it, and we'll come back and have more conversation. For those who have joined us, we are at the end of this segment. This is the 90, what is this, 98? Yeah, 98, 99, 98. So we're at the end of Girls' Life in Virginia Before the War. This is a pretty decent size novel here, but nonetheless, it's good to see what some people subscribe to. So when you're having that conversation, why do quote white people? Because sometimes we like having a conversation all by ourselves. Like we want to have the conversation only from our point of view, and that only leads to frustration. So hopefully, if anything, it helps to kind of give you understanding that European wasn't, like they say in the South, they wasn't stunting you. The only way that you played it into their lives is how you can help them. And so all of your issues, it is like, I'm not seeing, it's like the abuser and the abuse. They're not really seeing things from your point of view, because what she's describing is luxury. What she's describing is their level of heaven, to be able to bounce from plantation to plantation, eat this person's food, that person's food, go to this party, that party. They was living it up. So they were not really identifying with the pain. You don't really hear about servants. And when you do hear about enslaved individuals, like she was talking about the topsy-turvy plantation, she had an attitude, because in their estimation, and if you're not working your fingers to the bone, then you serve no use. If I can exploit you to the fullness, then I'm upset about that. So keep that in your mind. The next time you say, man, why? Just keep that in your mind. So with that said, what's today? Tuesday? We'll try to come back Thursday, because Wednesdays I have a standing appointment. So we'll try to come back Thursday and knock this out. So once again, thank you for tuning in. Click the links in the box. We have books on sale. Angry Black Woman Syndrome Revisited. My brother, my keeper, myself and my daughter, we brainstorming, going to work on part 2. We have another book already on deck, Solonomics 101. And just check out the rest of the videos and share it with your families and friends. And volunteer. Volunteer to read, y'all. Volunteer to read. Reading is fundamental. 1.